The mind's potential lies beyond the realm of thought.
All right, welcome to the Being Now podcast. In episode 3, we'll be discussing how the topic desires and how to manage them. So, in the spirit of the show, Chris, how did desires and I suppose ultimately the desire to manage those desires play out for you this week?
I had a really eventful week, actually. A lot of moving pieces, a lot of stress and everything going on. One thing that I have been working on pretty much like the past couple months now is working on desires and what makes them very present in my life and how to abandon the attachment that I have to them. And so I read a lot into Taoism, Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, and a lot of what they teach is abandoning desires so that way you don't create suffering, because that's pretty much what they say is the root of all suffering, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, with all the work that I've been putting in like these past few months and all the stress that I've had this past week with custody of my child and just with work and a lot of moving pieces, and I was struggling because I don't want to be in the position I'm in right now. You know, I'm desiring to be, you know, maybe a week into the future, 2 weeks into the future. And I had to sit with that. I'm like, why do I want that? And obviously, you know, like I said, it's because of the situation I'm in now. I'm labeling as a bad situation. And I know we talked about this on episode 1, you know, the yin and yang. And I tried, you know, really focusing on that and appreciating the whole experience as it is. It's just so hard, you know, when those negative or what you would label negative things are happening. And so what I had to do to kind of abandon that desire is I had to ground myself again and really be present and appreciate where I am at and understand that even though I might label this as a negative thing, there's so much to learn from this experience. And I'm not going to learn as much as I can if I'm too focused on getting out of it instead of the opportunities that are presented in the situation in the present moment.
That's interesting because, you know, we talked throughout the week anyway, but one of the conversations we had, you had said, you know, I forget exactly how it went, but there was a moment when you said, I at least know that I'm much better equipped to handle what I'm dealing with now than I was before. And I think that speaks to that, you know what I mean? Being able to do that.
Yeah, most definitely. Like a few months ago, if I were to go through the life situation I'm going through right now, it would have totally crippled me, and I probably would have been drinking or, you know, smoking or something, but I haven't been doing any of that. So I definitely think with the knowledge I have been able to attain from a lot of these spiritual teachers and learning how to accept the current situation, how to surrender to it. And you actually said this earlier when we were talking on the phone, yeah, and related to desires. And in Taoism, they say that everything that we need, we already have. And so that was kind of like, you know, it really, I've kind of known that, right? But, you know, sometimes you still have to have those reminders. And, you know, that's why we do the podcast too, is to, you know, keep this at the forefront of our brain. But yeah, that definitely helped me a lot today too. And today, actually, so, you know, I meet with this personal development group every Saturday.
Yep.
And amazing people, probably some of the healthiest friends I've ever had. No offense to my other friends. I love them so much, but we didn't always do the healthiest things for ourselves. But so today being Sunday, we had another event where we went and did a cold plunge. And so I'm in Seattle, so it's always cold over here. And, you know, being October, it's yeah, the water is really freaking cold. So what we did is we did like a meditation, a sound bath, some breath work, and it was really fun. And then, kind of prepared ourselves to go into the water. So when we got in the water, immediately, like what came to my head was desires. What am I desiring in this situation? I'm desiring to get out and to go get a blanket and to be warm because this
Because this sucks. Oh man, that's funny.
Yeah, it was like, this is freezing. And so what I had to remind myself is why I'm doing this. And this is to practice my self-discipline. And we were staying in the water for 2 minutes. And so we're practicing self-discipline. And to me, what that was seeing this desire that I have, to get out of the water, to be warm. And I took it as an opportunity to abandon that desire and stay in the water and accept that this is my situation for the next 2 minutes. And I'm not going to worry about it. I'm not going to stress about it. I'm just going to sit here and freeze for for 2 minutes.
Well,
and it helped me get through it.
Because you're, instead of like your mind screaming and looking for a way out, you start looking for a way to deal, right? And it just shifts the narrative entirely.
I was actually I was watching this YouTube video. I think his name's Dave or David Goggins.
And that dude's crazy.
Yeah, what he does is like he goes for a run. He runs like 30, 50 miles every morning.
Yeah, like every day.
One of the things that he told himself was like once he hit his goal mark for the day, he just kept running. And he told himself, like, he didn't tell himself when he was going to stop, because then you have, something to look forward to. You have this, desire with what you are doing currently, and it's going to be fulfilled, within like the next mile, the next 2 miles. But when you don't tell yourself, those things, and you just accept the moment as it is, and you just keep chugging along until, the next thing comes, that's the best way to do it, I guess, or in my opinion, is just really be present and accept.
Yeah, that's really hard to do sometimes.
Yeah. How about you, man? How has desires been affecting you this week?
Well, I gotta say, man, I think the only desire I had was to wrap my mind around the topic, like, and I even thought about it like that, because I've talked about this like really big shift I've seen in myself just in doing things I don't normally do. And, one of them being a show that's even a show, or even a show that's like this. And, I'm so grateful for that. But I noticed that, one of the things that I had read about when I was kind of looking up some things about the way desire works in the mind and stuff like that, is a lot of it is like it revolves around fear, and a lot of that comes from doubt. And I kind of realized, like, I wasn't having any second thoughts about anything. I mean, I had just about every second thought about what I came to you with, about what do you think about this with desire, and what about that, and that was just until you kind of set me straight a little bit. I was getting lost in that, but I mean, I've really haven't had anything that I've like had to do in the past week where I've struggled with it, other than getting ready for this episode. But and I think that's one of the I think the reason for that is because I haven't been doubting myself, because for whatever reason I just I haven't been taking the time to think, well, should I do this or should I do that, or and I'm pretty sure that in the times when I do that, I'm like taking a real quick evaluation of how does that match up with my current set of desires, right? Mm-hmm. And when that does happen, I'm kind of in a split second trying to evaluate it, and if it falls in line with it, then I'll try to justify it with other reasons why it supports that, right? Yeah. Or I'll think, no, I shouldn't do it because of this, or whatever it is. But I've just it's almost like that movie Yes Man, where I don't know if you've seen that or not.
Yeah, it's a great movie.
Yeah, he just It's probably a really good movie about being present in the moment, because all he does is just what yes, 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 right.
Yeah.
But I think that's the kind of the essence of what my week was like. And but as far as, wrapping my head around this topic, at first I had some really different ideas, other than what I came to from our conversation, and some of the other things I came to. But the first thing I did was I started off by defining the word desire, which is, for the record, a strong feeling of wanting to have something or wishing for something to happen. And when you think about it like that, like, I got the impression that a desire is something we seek because we feel like when we have it, we'll either be whole or we'll be closer to whole than we are now.
Hmm.
And dude, that was my first mistake. I should have just stopped there and said this is complete nonsense, right? Because it doesn't fit at all. Because the whole essence of this thing, and this is why I'm so glad we do this, come here and meet once a week like this, because this is all new to me, and I need a constant reminder of, some of these things are just, I don't need to understand it, and I don't question. I try not to as much as I do,
Yeah.
but I heard something that was, it talked about our need to understand things, and what that's really about is because when we understand it, we feel like we can control it. And I think that's the issue I had with desires, was I wanted to understand everything I could about it, so that I could have as much control over it as I could. And even as I go through my notes, I think that becomes evident. I found cases that support the negative aspects of desire, cases that support the positive. And I mean, ultimately, I think I just got more lost than I did found, until we kind of settled down, and I mean, really, man, you kind of set me straight. And I don't remember exactly what the phrase was, but it totally hit me like a truck. And but yeah, so that's kind of how my week has been. So like, everything that I did was really, really good, and it went well. But every time I stopped and thought about this, I got confused, and
Yeah.
but
And I go ahead.
no, well, I was going to say that that's the whole thing of it, right? Like, if you're really doing this, you're not kind of contemplating anything as you're doing it. You're just kind of that uh, kind of action without effort thing. You're just kind
Oh
of,
yeah.
yeah. And so that's one of the other things I noticed, is when I'm thinking about things like this, I'm not doing anything. So
um, One thing I was going to say that I really like that you mentioned, because I think it's a very important thing to talk about, is when we talk about desires, and there's the desires we create that are gonna like make us happy as far as like external things go. So like money, cars, like we want the newest clothes, stuff like that that we know we don't need. But then in turn, there's also those desires that we naturally just kind of have, like the desire to be loved and to love, and the desire to feel connected and understood, and like you said, to learn. Like that was one thing I really struggled with when I was learning how to abandon my desires, because I was like, well, a lot of these things, the natural desires I have, how do I get rid of those? Like that's just a part of who I am as a person.
mm,
And that it ties back into, what they say in Taoism is you already have everything that you need. So
right.
once you're able to kind of learn that for yourself, and that's just like one of those things, man. You gotta experience, you gotta be present, and then it'll come. But it takes practice, it takes meditation. It's just not something anyone can kind of teach you. That's like
And,
the whole point of Tao and Zen. They
right.
show you how to experience it, but from there, it's you're all on your own.
And that's what's so cool about when I kind of snapped out of this whole thing, because I kind of realized, like, the way I thought about it was, all of these things that I desire, they all involve the future, right? Um, maybe some of them are more immediate, but ultimately it's like, if I want a better this, right? Like if I want a better life, then I want this. And if I want a better that, then, I'm going to need this. And the thing I kind of came to was, you know, moment to moment, we kind of just seem to be guided in the right direction, and I don't try to figure that out anymore, or at least that's what I intend to do, is not try to figure it
Yeah.
out as much, at least. But I think there's maybe something to that, and like our subconscious is a real thing, and there's certain processes in our body that we don't control. Our heartbeat, we don't control, you know how our liver works, or none of that. Like, you know there's things we have control over and things that we don't. And I think just because we're aware that the future could be better, or that our current state could, quote unquote, be better than it is now, we try to take control of the thing that that motivates us to get there, which is desire. And so the thing I kind of came to was, um it's better to have like a system in place, because a system, doesn't have a start or an end. It just runs, right? So, and that kind of falls in line to the whole nature and universe aspect of the Tao, because what it turns into is, you're not you're not concerned about the results anymore. You're not concerned about where you're starting from. You're just part of the thing that keeps going. And I think you said something about letting go earlier, and that's kind of what you have to be able to do for that, I guess, is, let go, and just know that, when you get hungry, you're going to find some food, right? Like, one of two things is going to happen. You're either going to sit there and not do anything and starve to death, or you're going to go get some food. And I think that, as simple as it is, applies to absolutely everything that you do, right?
Yeah, most definitely. I don't, when we talked earlier about the desires and everything, you kind of referenced it, with, when you're hungry, you eat. When you're tired, you sleep. And when we have desires, that's when things start getting complicated. We have an attachment to something, and then we're like, oh well, what am I going to eat? Do I want this? Do I want that? Am I going to get fat? Am I going to get bloated? Is this going to, it starts to complicate so many things, and it doesn't need to happen, right? But one thing that you can do, and like you said, is letting go. But you can still set the intentions for outcomes that you would like to see happen, but you're not attaching yourself to those emotionally. So that way, when the results come, regardless of how they come, you're not affected in any way. You're able to accept it as it is and move on and keep going. And then if it doesn't turn out the way you want, it's just a learning experience is all it is. And if it turns out the way you did want it to, then celebrate, joy, excitement, like feel that. But when I was listening to a podcast on Taoism, and his name is Dan Casas Murray, and he kind of used the, like, planting a strawberry plant, for an example. He dug a hole. He put the seeds in there, he watered it, and then he set the intentions and the conditions for it to grow. But after that, he just let it be. But if you come back and you're constantly like trying to water it, trying to take control, trying to get them to grow faster, trying to make all these things happen, you're probably going to kill it. And then you're going to be disappointed, and the whole experience was horrible.
Well, I had messaged you something before we started, which was, I think I know the secret to manifesting, and I said that in a comical tone, but it really is kind of exactly what we're talking about, where you said, like, attachment to things. And this whole concept of manifesting what you need or whatever, when you don't have any actual desires, like you said, you still have intentions on a direction, at least, but when you're not, like, actually attached to anything, and you start to, this whole concept of an awakening, where you're starting to enter this non-dualistic sense of just seeing everything for what it is and stopping there, right? Like not imposing what you feel about the situation or anything that you've been told of what it should be or any of that stuff at all. When you just look at things for what they are and you don't have any desires, like you could kind of say that you manifest what's in front of you, right? And I just think that might be like an interesting way that maybe that's really what they mean when they say manifest your, your reality or whatever.
Uh, My understanding of manifestation, or at least the way I like to perceive it, because this is what's worked well for me. When I first heard it, people are like, "Oh, if you do this or you do that, you can manifest, yourself a large chunk of money or whatever. You got to feel it, think it, whatever." But it's still like you're desiring something, and then if it doesn't
Yeah.
come, then you feel, you're still let down. But the way I use manifestation, for example, this is something someone actually recommended to me, because for a while, like, I struggled with being single because I like to be in relationships. I like to be connected with people and my partner. I like to experience life together. So being single was one of those things that was really hard for me. And so this guy, he recommended, he was like, when you start to, feel lonely, you start to feel down, just imagine that person is with you. Don't have a face, don't have a name to them. Just imagine how you would feel if they were there right now. And then you kind of, I got like some butterflies in my chest and my stomach, and I felt good. And you're aligning yourself with that energy, right? Like that energy that you would feel if it were there. And then just knowing that inevitably it'll probably come soon. And if it doesn't, stop holding attachment to it. But now you can feel that energy that you're trying to align yourself with, and you manifested it for yourself.
That, to me, that says, there's a concept like if you, the things you want in a partner, you should be those things yourself, right? Like
Yeah.
that's kind of what I get out of that is like you attract what you put out. And so if that's, what those certain qualities or whatever, if that's what you're kind of aligning with, that's what other people are going to see in you. And so I totally, understand where that's coming from in that sense.
Yeah, the law of
And
attraction is powerful.
yeah, and I kind of at one point was thinking, how do I know what actions to take? Like if I'm not in pursuit of a desire and I'm just trying to be present in the moment and just go with the flow, how do I know if I should, even move? And I think that that's a very common thing that people that start to, like I and you are to embrace this, like this kind of philosophy. I think that's a common thing that they at least struggle with for
Yeah.
a short time. And everything that I found about it seems to be, and this is what I experienced myself, is you're not supposed to do nothing, right? You're supposed to not have an attachment to, um, the everything that goes into the reason for doing it, which is also the outcome. And if you just, if you're hungry, go eat, right? And it's so simple, and I can sit here and say it now, but dude, I get so lost in it at times. And I know that recently I haven't been, and I think it all comes to doubt, at least for me. If I end up doubting myself, then that's when I start to second guess. And that's when I need to think that I need to realign. And that's when desires come into play. And if I just act in the moment and do what flows, that's just not even a factor.
Yeah. What I'm gonna say is gonna tie into kind of what you said, where when you're embracing this philosophy of abandoning your desires, and you wake up and you're like, okay, so what do I do now? Like, I have no motivation, no drive to do anything. So, I think desires are healthy, and that's what I thought too at first. I was like, well, they do motivate me,
Yeah.
they do get me up out of bed, so they must serve some kind of purpose, right? And so, like, the understanding that I have of it now is, and I'm going to use relationships again for an example, because this has just been the struggle for me for most of my life. Like I've always been in long-term relationships ever since I was like 13. Now, granted, some of those relationships weren't necessarily serious, but I was never alone. So, being on this journey and being alone is just one of the hardest things I've had to do. And that was one of the hardest desires I had to let go of, was the desire to be with someone and the attachment that I had with that and not being alone. And so trying to figure out like, how can I get rid of that desire and still like feel motivated to go out and date and to, set those conditions for it to happen? How will that work if I don't want to, or if I don't desire a relationship per se? And so like the conclusion that I came to that really just helps me with anything is we're still here as humans to experience. These are fun things that we can go and do. And so, for example, if I go on dates, I can go on dates and not have a desire to be with them or to have a very specific outcome that benefits me. I'm not attached to it. I can just go experience it and just have fun. And that's what like the whole point I feel of life is letting go of those desires, because those desires are just, keeping up the mental activity, not allowing you to be present. And if you're not being present, you're not living. You're just in your thoughts and your illusions and
And
the
people see that in you too, right? Like they know when you're preoccupied, or they know when you expect so much out of something, like they people pick up on that naturally. And I think that kind of speaks to what you're saying, like when you're not caught up in the thought of all the thing represents to you, right?
Mhm.
And your attachment to it, then it's almost like the nonchalant guy that seems like he's got it all together, even though he doesn't really, like seem to care. But he's one of the most like deeply happy people you'll ever meet.
Uh-huh.
I I think that's kind of what that means for me, at least.
Yeah, and what I was gonna say too, like the topic that I was just talking about with relationships, and then how Dan Costas Murray talked about the strawberry plant, where he just set the conditions to allow it to happen and manifest on its own, instead of constantly trying to put in this extra effort and all this extra energy for it to maybe or maybe not happen. So that's kind of the approach I've been taking now lately, these past couple months, is with dating. Like I'm so proud to say, because this is something I struggled with for a long time, is I can be alone and be totally content and happy with where I'm at and not have such a strong desire to be loved by somebody and to have them in my presence. But I can set those conditions to allow it to happen, so that way when it does, I'll be more present, I'll be more fulfilled, and I'll be able to be a better partner for them. Because then, say I do get, if it was a desire I was attached to, and I do get, a relationship, then what? Now I'm going to be like so scared because I'm so overly attached to this desire. I'm going to, probably still fuck it up, like by being too clingy, or, just getting so in my head about things, getting insecure, when that wouldn't happen in the first place if I didn't have that desire and I just accepted the present moment as it is.
Well, to keep in the theme of the relationship sense, um, you kind of get blinded by a lot of things when your focus is on your desires too. Because when you say like, I'm content just being with myself, right? Like what that becomes is, I'm not looking for anything like like specific from a person. Like I'm looking at how it vibes, and how it happens, what the experience is like when I'm with that person. And when you're like attached to those desires, you kind of ignore a lot of like red flags, right? um
Yes. I'm
yeah,
famous for that. Famous for that
yeah.
one.
And that just ends up being the thing that breaks you up sometimes. And I just thought that was a really interesting thing that came to me when you were saying that.
Yeah, that's like I was actually talking to one of my good friends last night on the phone, and we were talking about like relationships and what our understanding of true love was. And I was telling her about my past relationships, and a lot of times, this ties into that desire that I have of wanting to be loved. And what would happen is I would notice these red flags, but at least my desire was fulfilled. So I I use spirituality actually as like a tool against myself. I was like, you know what? Maybe I'm just not being open minded. Maybe I need to, maybe this is a growing opportunity for me. But although I was teaching myself the same lesson over and over and over and over again. And it just
Sometimes we
kept
learn
biting me in
slow.
that. Yeah. So, yeah, I would ignore those red flags, and then, I would be like, okay, well, it's something we can work on. It's okay. I'm not worried about it. And then, later down the road, deep in the relationship now, those red flags are huge issues and they break us up.
Well,
So,
I think that ties into the concept of being authentic to yourself, right? Like you know when you're ignoring a red flag. You like with anything, right? Like
yeah.
it enters your mind, you pick up on a vibe or something, and something just doesn't sit quite right, and you just kind of quickly dismiss it and then try to move away from it as fast as you can. You know what I mean? And at least
Hmm.
try to focus in another area that's not a part of, and so that you don't have to think about it. And I think that becomes easier to do the more you're not in the present moment. Like when you're focused on what the relationship could be, right? You're not
Hmm.
concerned about, maybe she didn't like some kind of social thing that whatever it would be that is the thing you've picked up on that was the red flag. Like you just kind of put that aside because maybe this will finally be the thing that all my relationships before couldn't be.
Yeah.
And when you apply that to everything, um, and you're in the present moment, like you you can't help but just like come crashing to a stop, right? Like
Yeah.
and address it. And I think that's better. Like I think it's
Mhm.
probably healthier. Like even like that's not to say like a red flag means the thing is over, right? Like a red flag is just a red flag. It's not good or bad. It's just, hey, why'd you do that, right? Like
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. And another thing that I was actually going to mention too that just kind of makes all of this, when it comes to relationships and these desires, it just makes this shit worse is when you have that sort of like desperation almost, tied behind that desire, you're putting that energy out there and you're manifesting that. So it comes right back to you. So you're going to probably find someone who feels the same way you do and they're overlooking your red flags. And then you both get into this toxic ass relationship. The honeymoon phase is cool because you guys are excited. You guys finally fucking found somebody. They're the one. And then, a year passes by and then you start butting heads like fucking madmen. And then you guys just end up both hurting yourselves so much just because you weren't aware of how badly these desires were affecting you.
Well, the thing I was trying to explain earlier, which I kind of have a better grasp on now, is you know I used the word last week. I think course correction, right?
Yeah.
And maybe it's better to just think of it as being flexible, right? Instead of just being attached to everything all the time, just be flexible. And instead of breaking when something doesn't feel like it's going to work out the way you think, just bend a little bit and stay present and just sit with it, right? And just kind of, because the whole nature of the thing changes when it's not a do or die, you know, when it becomes, this thing can go wrong and it's not going to change, the thing that I'm really just flowing with. And that it's so hard to even think about sometimes because
Yeah.
um you get caught up in like thinking itself is just I what I keep coming back to is if I just the moments that I stop to think are the moments when I create problems. And when I don't do that and I almost like let life run itself and I just play my part in the machine of life, things just work out. And that's how I've started to find out that I'm actually a little creative. That's how, like I started a business. Like I don't do those type of things, and I certainly don't
Yeah.
do them after I think about it and come up with reasons why they don't support my false sense of desire. Right?
Yeah, you're just in that flow state. Yeah, I'm so excited to do an episode on flow. That's going to be such an amazing episode. Really stoked for that one. But one thing I did want to touch on was, so we've been talking about desires, how they negatively impact us, why we should abandon them, how you and me have done that, and some of the fruits that we've been able to see from doing so. Um, One thing that I struggled with, and I don't know if you did, so I'm going to ask you, but you did mention it earlier, the desire to get rid of desires. What was your
Yeah.
experience with that like?
Well, I was thinking about it, and I tried to find some other people that have dealt with this kind of thing in the past, and as a way to kind of guide myself in the right direction. And what I ended up finding I agreed with when I, just kind of let it let it sit for a minute is you really don't you don't actually lose anything when you just stop desiring, right? Because it goes back to that whole, if you're hungry, you're going to eat thing. Like, I feel like we just have like some intuition, at least, that when we just live our lives, we just naturally kind of, and there's a thing that I found, and I'm going to read it real quick because it's this right here, and it's what really kind of set the tone for me and the way that I think about it now. And it says, don't get too locked into a plan. Be flexible and understand that branching off may be necessary. Being too rigid in planning and outcomes would be the misstep here. Systems in place of goals, moderation in all things. And that's kind of the approach I have to take, right? Like instead of being attached to an outcome that's related to a desire, like that's already so many steps, right? I have to take all of these things into consideration, where instead if I just have a general sense of direction, right, just that way is north, and I'm just going to make sure that most of the day I at least head north, right? Because for whatever reason we're going north in this scenario, right? But it's that whole thing, like you just have and it's not hard. You don't have to spend a lot of time to think about it. You sit down and you think, what do I really want out of life? And it turns out, at least for me, that it's not money, right? It's the kind of life I want to have. And there's things in that are like, you have to have enough money to afford a place or all of those things. But when you take an active part in this, and it's so weird to say that, like an active part in the role of no action, right? Because I mean that's really what it is. Like you're being present and you're just going with the flow. Like you just naturally kind of take care of those things. And I know that in times in the past I haven't done that, and I'm not quite sure how that's changed. I think it's mainly because of self doubt and inability to see myself as being capable of the type of person that could do things like that. And so I definitely think there's a progression, right? Like you can't just,
Yeah.
and I mean maybe you can just wake up one day and embrace this whole thing and off you go to the races. But I know, at least for me, like it wasn't as simple as, one day I have all these desires and the next day I don't, right? And I
Hmm.
think that's why I had such a hard time with this, because really it's a combination of my entire life that led up to even being able to come to that conclusion, right? Like I had to
Yeah.
go through all of those things in my past that created the conditions that I had to step away from to even realize that this is how my life should go. And I think that's probably the case for most people. And I know for me, it's hard to think about it like that sometimes, because it when you start getting in this realm of non dualism, and there's more than just this and that, like everything's part of a whole, and all of that kind of, it changes the way you think.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's hard to remember that there was a lot of things that happened that led up to this being able to think in a certain way. And I think when I keep that in mind, it makes it a lot easier to grasp the whole thing. But ultimately, when I just let go and go with it works out on its own.
Yeah. And I just wanted to mention really quick, anyone that is listening to this podcast right now, this is something that I wasn't aware of. It kind of took me some researching to do. Non-dualism is when you feel connected as a whole. You don't see anything as separate. Like you see everything as one big connected, you call it energy, God, Tao, whatever you want to call it. But dualistic or dualism consciousness is when you're aware of your consciousness, your being, but you're still separating it from others. And that actually played a big role into me being able to be content, which in turn being content was able to let me abandon my desires. So it was such a long process. And like what really got it started is when I was reading into Buddhism, and they were, Buddhism, I'm pretty sure Hinduism, I'd have to double check, so don't quote me on this one. And I apologize anyone listening that does study Hinduism if I get this wrong. I don't mean to offend anybody. But Taoism as well, such a strong emphasis on how desires are the root of all evil and how you should abandon them.
Yeah.
So then that immediately created another desire. How do I abandon all my desires? How do I do that? And I just did so much research, and then like so many people were saying that, oh, it's just easy, like stop researching, stop doing this, stop trying to gain more knowledge, because that's taking away the whole experience that you're supposed to be experiencing. But I didn't know why they kept saying that. There wasn't a whole lot of in-depth, and I feel like maybe a lot of people just might not have, a clear understanding themselves. They just heard it from somebody else and they're trying to help other people, but they haven't experienced it yet. So I feel like that's why it might, come out like that from other people. But
yeah, and I think that's the whole, we want to understand things that gets us off track.
Yeah, that's all from the ego. But
Yeah.
yeah, as I was saying, so I was being told by so many people, stop researching, stop using your brain to try and figure it out, because your brain isn't going to be able to understand the concept of these philosophies and how to experience it, because the minute you start using your mind, you're pulling yourself right out of it. And so I was like, well, shit, how do you even do this then? Like, how is this even a thing? How do because I have to use my brain to, figure out everything, or to, at least that's what I thought. So what I did, and if this helps anyone like that's feeling discouraged about not being able to, feeling self-doubt, like, okay, so I shouldn't research, but I don't know how to experience what they're talking about. So you're like kind of in this gray area of not knowing what the fuck to do, and you're just lost. What I did was, and I talked to you about this the other day, Sean, is I used the tools that I was able to get from like spiritual teachers, books. I still read all the philosophy and everything. Like I had to obtain a certain amount of knowledge and wisdom from them in order to be able to use it, and then discard that knowledge and know that it's not needed anymore. And then after that, you don't need to keep searching for more knowledge, right? And so yeah, that's pretty much what I did. Is I learned as much as I could, as my brain would allow. And then from there, I felt like I was finally comfortable and I had a good understanding of how I needed to proceed. And then now, like, I I mean, yeah, obviously, a lot of the philosophy and everything I still have to practice daily, but it's not like something I'm desiring to continuously try and figure out anymore. And what I was going to say too is, so that tied into the non-dualism realization for me. And what that realization was really understanding how, I mean, like scientifically, we're all just made up of this, atoms, same thing, all of us, and we're all connected. And by realizing that, it brought me a sense of peace. And then, through the teachings of Tao, you already have everything that you need, and everything that you need is love and compassion, and other people have that as well. And as long as you can see that in them and you can see it in yourself, that's all you need. And then that brought in such an overwhelming sense of peace for me that it helped me be so content with where I am now and just appreciate the experience I'm having in this moment to moment, mind you. I'm not able to do it all the time. I'm not perfect, but it's something I'm actively, practicing and working on. And it makes it so much easier to, abandon desires. And another thing about desires too is it's like, you'll still have desires here and there. Like, they're going to come up just as naturally as emotions might or thoughts might. And it's an active process. Like, you don't just abandon your desires, and then they're gone forever. It's
Right.
you keep working on it. But when you notice those desires, you notice it for what it is, and you don't attach any emotion to it. It's just like another thought or an emotion that you feel. You see it, you recognize it, and you let it pass.
And when you were saying that, there's this thing that, and I hope this helps people in the same vein, but there's this thing that we do where we experience something and we think, I did that. How do I do that again? Right. And that's how we try to figure this whole thing out is I did something and it made me feel this way. So how do I do that again and then not leave it? Right. And that's so contrary to the entire philosophy of this way of thinking. And it's like you said, it's not overnight, and it's certainly something that we deal with on a daily basis. But I think something like this is good for that, because it helps us kind of, I know for me at least, and maybe it's, there's a lot to be said about just this back and forth that you and I have on a daily basis. Cause I mean, you've seen it, man. Like, I'm nothing but positive day in and day out. And
Yeah.
it's, I can't explain it. I really can't. I just know that, I'm not doubting myself, and I'm not, like, when I have these things that make me overjoyously happy, and I realize that, I'm actually there, and that's why it's so enjoyable. I don't like look at it after the fact and think, how can I do that again? Because when I'm doing that, I'm not present in what's going on now. Right.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I had to kind of get my head around at first, but now that I understand that, like, and that's probably why I have such a hard time talking on this show sometimes, because I'm trying to do that, and I know that I shouldn't. But I know that when I'm just letting go and I'm not worried about, any of the self-conscious things or the doubts or any of that, like, things just kind of work on their own. And I don't know if that'll help, but I sure hope it does if anybody's listening, because that's kind of one of the things I had to go through. So,
No. Well, with that, I feel like we definitely covered a lot on desires. I don't know if I have anything more I could add on to it. Is there anything you feel like you'd like to add on?
I mean, if you can't get your head around what we're talking about, just set the desire as you want to learn more, right? And being on the path is just being on the path, right? And don't be worried about when you get there. Just know you're in the right direction. So
Yeah.
I have to tell myself that all the time.
I wouldn't say set yourself on the desire, but set yourself on the intention to go on that
Right.
path. And then, yeah, you're probably going to take so many turns. I still take turns like every day. Like just when I think I have something figured out, quickly humbled by God, Tao, energy, whatever names are out there, so many of them. Quickly humbled, and yeah, just allow things to go wrong, allow things to go right. But the more you try and control it, the more you try and think about it, the less and less you're going to be able to experience, and the less and less you'll be able to learn, and the slower your progress will be on your journey. From a personal experience.
So, I'm good. Are you good?
Yeah, and I guess just one more thing to add on to there. There is no, I said that, the slower you'll be on your journey with that, but there's no rush either. There's really no rush. If you try to rush anything or dive in headfirst to all of these philosophies, and it's so easy for everything to get jumbled up, and it's hard to make sense of any of it. And just take it a day at a time. I know we mentioned this on the last episode, just 1% better every day.
Yeah.
So with
Well,
that, I think I am said I've said all I've had to say. So
well, hopefully, at least next week will be a little easier for me to present because it's not going to be about all the things we do in our head about what we intend to do and how we intend to do it. So our topic next week is going to be maintaining presence among others. So I'm excited about that, and I look forward to talking with you next week, Chris.
yeah, take care, man, and see you next week.